It was just past midnight on a cold November night when Jack, a long-haul trucker, was pushing through the endless stretch of Interstate 80 in Nevada. The road was empty, the kind of empty that makes you feel like the whole world has gone to sleep except you. His headlights cut through the desert darkness, but beyond that beam of light there was nothing. No houses, no cars, no sign of life for miles. He'd been driving for almost 9 hours straight. His eyes were heavy, and every mile felt slower than the last. That's when he saw her. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Just up ahead, on the shoulder of the highway, was the figure of a woman. She was standing perfectly still, her arms folded tightly against her chest as if she was freezing. She wore what looked like an old-fashioned white dress, something you'd expect to see in a photo from the 1960s, not on a woman stranded on a Nevada highway in 2019. Jack's stomach tightened. Every instinct told him not to stop, but something about the way she was standing, alone, vulnerable, almost desperate, pulled at him. Against his better judgment, he slowed down, flicked on his hazard lights, and rolled to a stop beside her. The woman didn't move until he leaned over and opened the passenger door. "Need a ride?" Jack asked, his voice low, almost cautious. She looked at him then, and he swore he felt a chill crawl up his spine. Her face was pale, her dark hair hanging loose and wet around her shoulders, though there was no rain that night. She nodded once, silently, and climbed into the cab. The air in the truck seemed to drop 10 degrees as soon as she shut the door. Jack cleared his throat, trying to shake the unease. "Where you headed?" he asked, glancing at her as he pulled back onto the highway. "Winnemucca," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost distant. Jack nodded. Winnemucca wasn't far, maybe 30 miles. He tried to make small talk, but she said nothing else. She just stared out the windshield, her hands folded neatly in her lap, as if she were deep in thought. For a while the silence filled the cab. Jack could hear the hum of the tires, the faint rattle of tools behind the seat, and his own heartbeat in his ears. He kept sneaking glances at her. Something about the way she sat made his nerves burn. She looked fragile, almost translucent in the dim glow of the dashboard. When they were about 10 miles from Winnemucca, Jack finally worked up the courage to look directly at her again. And that's when his blood ran cold. The passenger seat was empty. He slammed the brakes, the truck screeching and wobbling across the deserted highway. His chest pounded as he whipped his head around, checking the sleeper cab, the floor, the side mirror. Nothing. She was gone. Jack sat there frozen, his hands gripping the wheels so hard his knuckles turned white. He couldn't understand it. He had watched her get into his truck. He had heard her voice. He had smelled the faint scent of wet hair, of cold night air when she climbed in. And now, nothing. He drove the rest of the way to Winnemucca in silence, his eyes darting to the empty seat every few seconds. When he finally pulled into a diner to catch his breath, he told the waitress what had happened. The woman didn't look surprised. She just gave him a knowing look and said quietly, "You saw her too, huh? You're not the first trucker to pick her up on this stretch of I-80. She died in a car wreck just outside of town back in the 60s. Some say she's still trying to get home." Jack didn't finish his coffee that night. He couldn't. The phantom hitchhiker had vanished from his truck, but she hadn't left his mind. Even years later, every time he drove Interstate 80 at night, he kept his eyes on the shoulder of the road, half praying he'd never see her again. Mark had been driving trucks for over 15 years, and he thought he'd seen just about everything the road had to offer. Drunk drivers, wildlife, even the occasional fireball meteor tearing through the sky. But nothing in his experience prepared him for that night in northern Canada. It was late January, the dead of winter, and the night seemed darker than usual. Snowbanks rose like frozen walls on either side of the highway, and the only thing keeping him company was the steady hum of his rig. His GPS told him the next town was still an hour away, and exhaustion gnawed at his eyes. He promised himself that if he saw a rest stop, he'd pull in. That's when he saw the light. Up ahead, Through the falling snow, a lone streetlight glowed like a beacon in the blackness. Beneath it, a small pull-off area, one of those isolated rest stops with a trash can and maybe a bench. Relief washed over him, a chance to stretch, splash some water on his face, maybe close his eyes for 10 minutes. As he rolled closer, he noticed how strange it was. The streetlight wasn't connected to anything. No sign, no road, no wires leading to it. Just a pole standing on the edge of the frozen highway, bathing the snow in a perfect white circle of light. Still, he slowed down and guided the truck toward it. The moment his tires crunched onto the pull-off, the light went out. Pitch black. Mark slammed on the brakes, his breath catching in his throat. His headlights barely cut through the darkness, but the streetlight pole was still there, except now it looked old, bent and rusted, not like the clean, bright lamp he'd seen seconds ago. Unease prickled the back of his neck. He leaned forward, peering into the shadows beyond the glass. That's when his GPS spoke up. In 200 meters, continue straight. Mark frowned. According to the screen, there should have been a service road right where he sat, leading off into the woods. But in front of him was nothing. Just endless snow and black trees swaying in the wind. His instincts screamed at him to leave. He threw the truck into reverse, but as he did, something flickered in his rearview mirror. For a split second, he thought he saw figures, 3, maybe 4 people, standing at the edge of the light circle. They were tall, still, their outlines barely visible against the snow. And then they were gone. Heart pounding, Mark backed onto the highway and floored it. The GPS glitched, the screen flickering with static before correcting itself. Recalculating. He didn't stop until he reached the next truck stop, where the bright neon lights and hum of diesel engines made him feel safe again. Later, while swapping stories with another trucker over coffee, he mentioned what he'd seen. The older man stared at him for a long moment before replying, "You pulled over near mile marker 187, didn't you? That's where a bus went off the road back in the 70s. Everyone on board froze before help arrived. Drivers say sometimes the road tricks you, shows you a light, even a side road, but if you follow it, you don't come back." Mark never drove that stretch at night again, and whenever he thought about it, his chest tightened, remembering how close he came to stepping out of the truck, walking under that flickering streetlight, and maybe never returning. Carlos had driven freight trucks across the Mexico-US border for years. He knew the desert roads, the endless checkpoints, the grueling night hauls. For him, the work was just routine. But one trip in the summer of 2014 changed the way he looked at the road forever. It was just after 2 a.m. when Carlos was making his way north with a sealed load. The manifest said industrial goods, nothing unusual. The desert around him stretched on endlessly, the sky so dark it seemed to swallow the road whole. His only companions were the glow of the dashboard and the faint crackle of the CB radio. At first it was subtle, a faint noise from behind him, almost like shifting cargo. He ignored it. Trailers groan and creak all the time, especially on rough stretches of road. But then he heard it again, louder this time, a scream. Carlos's blood ran cold. It wasn't the screech of metal, not the moan of an engine. It was human, high-pitched, muffled, desperate. He froze, his hands gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The sound echoed again, drawn out, like someone crying for help from inside the trailer. "No," he whispered to himself, shaking his head. "I'm just tired. It's nothing." But deep down, he knew what he heard. He pulled onto the shoulder, heart hammering in his chest. The desert night was eerily quiet as he stepped out of the cab. The trailer loomed behind him, tall and black against the stars. For a moment he just stood there, the dry wind chilling his sweat-soaked shirt, waiting, listening. Then another scream, clearer this time, definitely from inside. Carlos's instincts told him to rip open the back door, but the manifest was sealed. Breaking it would cost him his job. He pressed his ear against the cold metal. Faint thuds and scratching echoed from within. Someone, or something, was moving inside. He staggered back, his pulse racing. "Dios mío," he muttered, He grabbed his phone and called dispatch. His voice trembled as he explained what was happening. The dispatcher's reply was unnervingly calm. "Keep driving, don't stop, deliver the load as scheduled." Carlos nearly dropped the phone. "Are you kidding me? There's someone in there." But the dispatcher cut him off. "We'll handle it. Just keep driving." The call ended. Shaking, Carlos climbed back into the cab. Every mile felt heavier, the trailer behind him groaning with unseen weight. Sometimes the screams would return, short bursts of agony, then silence. Other times, he swore he heard scratching at the doors, as if whoever or whatever was trying to claw its way out. By the time he reached the yard at sunrise, his nerves were shattered. Supervisors met him at the gate, refusing to let him open the trailer. They waved him off, telling him his part was done, but curiosity burned in him like fire. He lingered, watching as two men in suits, men he'd never seen before, cut the seal and pulled open the doors. The trailer was empty, completely. No people, no animals, not a single box had been disturbed. But Carlos's stomach twisted when he noticed deep scratches gouged into the metal walls inside, long and uneven, like fingernails dragged across steel. When he asked what happened, one of the men snapped at him to leave. "Forget what you heard," he said. "For your own good." Carlos drove home that day with a hollow feeling in his chest. He'd been behind the wheel long enough to know fatigue could play tricks on the mind. But those screams, they had been real. Even now, whenever he drives near the border at night, he keeps his radio loud and his windows shut tight. Because sometimes in the quiet stretches of desert, he swears he can still hear it. Someone screaming far away, trapped in a place no one can see. It was the kind of night when the outback felt endless, an ocean of darkness stretching in every direction. Sam, a seasoned trucker from Perth, was hauling mining equipment through Western Australia. The roads out there were long, desolate, and deadly quiet. Once you left the glow of the last town, you could drive for hours without seeing a single car or a flicker of light. By 1 a.m., fatigue was creeping into Sam's body. His radio had gone silent, his thermos of coffee was empty, and the steady hum of the engine felt like a lullaby. He told himself he'd pull over at the next safe turnout. But out here, next could mean 50 miles. That's when he saw it. A figure on the gravel road. At first, Sam thought it was just his eyes playing tricks in the high beams. But as he drew closer, the shape became clearer. A man, standing just off the road, wearing what looked like a high-visibility safety vest. The fluorescent yellow gleamed unnaturally bright in the dark. The man raised an arm and waved. Sam's gut twisted. A pedestrian, this far out, in the middle of nowhere? Still, truckers had a code. You don't ignore someone in need. So he slowed down and eased the rig onto the shoulder. As the truck rolled to a stop, the figure stepped forward. That's when Sam noticed something was wrong. The reflective strips on the vest weren't reflecting his headlights at all. They were glowing on their own, like faint neon under the desert moonlight. And the man's movements, they weren't right either. Too slow, too stiff, like someone mimicking what walking should look like. Sam leaned forward, squinting, his pulse quickening. The figure stopped just short of the passenger side. He could make out the shape of a head, arms, legs, but the face, it wasn't there. Where features should have been was nothing but a blank, dark void. Sam's chest tightened. No, he whispered, his hand inching toward the gear shift. Then the figure moved again, this time quicker, as if lunging. Sam panicked. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, tires spitting gravel, as the truck roared back onto the highway. His heart hammered against his ribs. He didn't dare look back in the mirrors, but something told him not to. For the next 20 miles, his hands shook on the wheel. He kept the headlights locked on the road ahead, afraid of what he might see if he glanced to the side. When he finally rolled into the next roadhouse, he stumbled inside, pale and trembling. The other drivers stared as he poured himself a coffee with shaking hands. An older trucker, leathery and calm, asked him what had happened. Sam, still trembling, told him about the man on the gravel road. The vest, the blank face, the way it tried to reach his cab. The old man didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly and said, "You saw him too. Been out here for years, that one. Fella died during a road crew accident back in the 70s. Got crushed under his own rig. Some say he never left. Wears that vest, waits on the gravel road, tries to flag down anyone who'll stop." Sam barely touched his coffee after that. The thought of what might have happened if he'd opened the passenger door haunted him. Even today, whenever he drives the Outback at night, he keeps his rig locked tight, and if he sees a reflective vest on the shoulder of the road, he doesn't slow down. He just presses harder on the gas. When Tom, a trucker from Leeds, found himself alone on a delivery run. The motorway was slick with water, and the rhythm of the windshield wipers was the only sound keeping him company as he cut through the darkness. By 2 a.m. the road was completely deserted. No headlights ahead, no taillights behind, just him, his rig, and the steady drone of the engine. Fatigue was setting in, but Tom was determined to push through. Then his phone rang. He jumped slightly at the sudden vibration on the dash. Reaching over, he glanced at the screen. It was his wife's number. Relief washed over him. Maybe she was just checking in. He put her on speaker. "Hello?" But what answered wasn't his wife. It was a sound, soft, broken sobbing. A child's sobs. Tom frowned, leaning closer to the speaker. "Hello? Who is this?" The crying continued, low and muffled, like a little girl hiding under a blanket. His stomach twisted. He checked the line, but the call ID still showed his wife's number. Suddenly the sobbing stopped. Silence. And then, clear as day, the sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. Tom's hands tightened on the wheel. "Who the hell is this?" he barked, his voice trembling. Before he could hang up, a second sound froze him to his core. The breathing wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from behind him. The back seat. His pulse spiked. He didn't want to look, but every nerve in his body screamed at him to. Slowly, he shifted his eyes to the rearview mirror. For a split second, he swore he saw movement, a shadow shifting in the dim light, as if someone was sitting right there on the back bench. "Jesus Christ!" Tom gasped, slamming the brakes. The rig shuddered as he pulled onto the shoulder. He twisted around, staring at the back seat. Empty. Nothing but his jacket tossed across the cushions. His phone call ended with a sharp click. The line went dead. Tom sat frozen, his chest heaving, rain hammering the cab roof like frantic fingers. His mind raced, trying to piece it together. Had he imagined it? Was exhaustion playing tricks on him? When he finally reached a rest stop an hour later, he called his wife. She answered groggily, confused. "Tom, why are you calling so late?" His throat went dry. Did you ring me earlier?" "No," she replied softly. "I've been asleep. Why? Is everything okay?" Tom didn't tell her what happened. How could he? Later that night in his motel, he pulled back the covers and froze. On the sheets pressed faintly into the fabric were tiny wet footprints, like those of a child, leading up the bed. To this day, Tom refuses to answer his phone while driving at night, because sometimes, he swears, he still hears faint sobbing when he glances at the empty back seat. Diego had been hauling cargo through Spain for nearly a decade. He knew the roads, the tunnels, and the mountain passes like the back of his hand. But one night, while crossing through a remote stretch of highway near the Pyrenees, he encountered something that shook him so deeply, he never spoke of it again without his voice trembling. It was just after 1:30 a.m. The highway was silent, winding through the mountains in sharp curves and long tunnels. Fog hung low in the valleys, and Diego's headlights cut through it like blades. He hadn't seen another vehicle in nearly an hour. The isolation made his chest feel heavy. Up ahead, a dim orange glow appeared, a toll booth. Diego frowned. He didn't remember this booth being here. He had driven this route many times, and as far as he knew, there hadn't been a toll on this stretch for years. Still, he slowed down, his tires crunching over the wet asphalt as he approached. Inside the booth sat an old man. His skin looked pale, almost gray under the weak light. He wore a faded uniform cap tilted low over his eyes. When Diego rolled down his window, a damp chill swept into the cab. "Buenas noches," Diego said carefully, handing him a card. The man slowly shook his head. His movements were stiff, unnatural, like his joints barely worked. "No. Monedas," the man whispered. His voice was hoarse, like sand scraping against stone. He pointed to an old rusted cash tray. Diego hesitated. He hadn't carried coins in years. Who did? He dug through his console, managing to find a few euros in change. When he dropped them into the tray, the man's cracked fingers curled around them with eerie slowness. The barrier lifted. Diego drove forward, but something gnawed at him. The whole encounter felt wrong. He checked his mirror, curiosity getting the better of him, and what he saw nearly made him lose control of the truck. The booth was gone. There was nothing there. No light, no barrier, no building, just an empty patch of road swallowed by darkness. Diego's stomach dropped. His hands shook on the wheel. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, even checked his mirrors again. Still nothing. The toll booth. The man. Everything. Gone as if it had never existed. By the time he reached the next service station, his nerves were shot. He staggered inside and asked one of the attendants about the toll booth in the mountains. The man gave him a puzzled look. "There hasn't been a toll there in 30 years, he said. "That booth burned down, with the collector inside." Diego felt the blood drain from his face. He never spoke another word about it to anyone outside his family. But every time he drives through the Pyrenees at night, he carries coins in his pocket, just in case the midnight toll booth appears again. The Karoo Desert in South Africa is one of the loneliest stretches of road a trucker can face. For miles, there's nothing but dry, cracked earth, thorny brush, and sky so wide it feels like it swallows you whole. At night, it's worse, the kind of darkness that makes you feel like you're the last person left on earth. John, a veteran trucker from Cape Town, knew that road well. He'd driven it dozens of times. But one night, around 3 a.m., he swore he encountered something that didn't belong to this world. The air was still and suffocating. Even the insects had gone quiet. His headlights stretched far into the emptiness, when suddenly, up ahead, he saw another rig. It was an old model, the kind he hadn't seen in decades, rolling slowly along the shoulder. Its hazard lights blinked weakly, one on, one off. Dust kicked up from its tires as it crept forward. Relieved at the sight of another driver, John pulled into the opposite lane to pass. As he drew closer, something felt off. The cab windows were clouded with dust, but he could clearly see the silhouette of a driver inside, sitting upright, hands on the wheel, unmoving. John slowed slightly, honking his horn as a courtesy. The figure didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't move at all. When John finally pulled alongside, his stomach dropped. The cab was empty. The seat was torn, the dash covered in grime, and cobwebs stretched across the steering wheel. The figure he thought he saw was gone, as if it had never been there. Yet somehow the rig was still moving, engine growling, wheels spinning. Panic surged through him. He pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to leave it behind. For a few moments he refused to check his mirrors, but curiosity got the better of him. When he finally looked, the ghost rig was gone. No lights, no dust, no truck, just an endless stretch of desert road. His hands trembled on the wheel as he drove through the night, his mind racing. He didn't tell a soul until he reached a truck stop the next day. There he asked the locals if anyone had ever seen a strange rig on the Karoo roads. The older men fell quiet. One finally spoke. "There was a tanker that rolled through here in the 1980s. Driver fell asleep and never woke up. Crashed, burned alive inside. Some say his truck still runs the roads at night, searching for a place to stop." John never laughed at ghost stories again. Every time he drove through the Karoo, he prayed he wouldn't see those flickering hazard lights in the distance. Because if he did, he wasn't sure he'd have the courage to pass it a second time